Isn't that oddly in line with what Juelz have just said? Juelz, whose greatest accomplishment was rhyming boy with boy?
Yo, his voice was you should tell we gotta start teaching our kids though just financial wealth and literacy and all that. That shit early, because by the time they get to ninth grade, they should be just learning how to start businesses and how to. But they don't really need to know how to read.
Wait, stop.
I ain't gonna say that. I ain't gonna say that.
You gotta read your contract, Elves.
You don't have to listen to that too. They got apps you can put it in and it'll read it to you. Are you crazy?
What's more important, reading or math?
Math.
Told you.
Math. I think.
The problem that I have is that a lot of you think math is just numbers. It's just accounting. 1, 2, 3, addition, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or subtraction, right? That's not all that math is. For example, this bridge is math. Zooming in on the arc bridge, let's think about it. As you can see, we have an arc bridge where you have this bridge crossing this expanse of water. And I wonder if you guys have seen a shape like this before. Does that shape look familiar? Hold on. Does that look more familiar? This is a function. You've guys seen this graph. Do you think it might be important if this expanse right here is water, and this is a mountain or a hill, and this is another mountain or a hill? Do you think it might be important to understand minimums and maximums of functions if you want to build a bridge? I think it might be important because this is also math. There are numbers on this plane, yeah, but you can use these numbers to create a picture to help you solve problems. That's what math is also is. So then the question becomes, do I need to understand how to read in order to build a bridge? Short answer, no. But that depends on what part of building the bridge you're talking about. So I asked Google the same thing, Gemini, and it basically said no, because we've built bridges throughout history, and they've been built by people who couldn't read a single word, i.e., but they did have an oral tradition, an oral language. Language was spoken, obviously, but they couldn't read a single word. So he's right. Do you necessarily need to know how to read to build a bridge? Not necessarily, depending on the type of bridge you want to build. But let us be honest about the world in which we exist currently. If you just want to be the labor, you don't need to learn how to read to build a bridge. You can pass down all that math through the spoken word. You don't need to know how to read. It's happened in the past. But then we have to ask ourselves, do you want to design a bridge, particularly in this society? Yes. You need to learn how to read. Load-bearing capacity, they talk about legal permission, doing the paperwork, getting the permits, environmental impact studies, contracts, navigating bureaucracy, you need to learn how to read. And then they talk about the math itself. While you don't need to write essays, you do need to read and write complex mathematical notations. And then it talks about basic-ass algebra, and they talk about X, Y, pi, to ensure that your bridge doesn't collapse. If you want to be certified and get your certifications, you're going to need to learn how to read. Math is very important. But there is a reason why they say reading is fundamental, especially in the society that we live in today. If you decide that you're going to outsource your ability to read to these white people, because if we want to talk about it, oh, you can just feed it into this software program. Who in this country gets most of the money? And by extension, getting most of the money, gets most of the access to power, who gets that? Who gets the ability to actually build their businesses? Because you need capital to build your business. You need access to power to build your business. Who is most likely going to get access to that capital and access to that power to build the business, to build the software so that you can put your contract into it so that you can learn how to read? Is it going to be a white person or a black person? Be honest with yourself. They're likely going to be white. And if they operate under the system of white supremacy, whether they know it or not, you're automatically at a disadvantage. There have been whole conversations about how the algorithm impacts you if you're not a white man in this society. They just had an article in which women all they did was change their sex to male, and men did the converse. They changed their sex to female. And what they saw, just in general, this is not a study, but what they saw was that their reach extended for the women who changed their sex to male. They didn't change anything else. They didn't change their fucking picture, didn't change the name. All they did was change their sex to male. All of a sudden, the algorithm started pushing them out to other people so that other people can read their stuff. Same thing with the men. Change their sex to female. All of a sudden, their reach decrease. So the algorithm is already at work, whether they know it or not, impacting people by virtue of their sex, and you think it's not going to impact you by virtue of your race? And you are going to outsource your ability to read and comprehend to these white people and their software? That's very stupid. But then it reminded me of some shit, right? Because somebody said something important in which they were basically saying, man, we had entire laws written that prohibited us from reading, and you had people who literally gave their lives, literally, if not their bodies, for the sole purpose of teaching and passing down knowledge through the written language. And then I found this particular law, and it was fascinating because it kind of fit perfectly for this example, in which this is a man who says that reading isn't important, but math is, right? This is a law that was written into the act passed by the General Assembly of the state of North Carolina in the session of 1830 to 1831 in Raleigh. So let's read it. An act to prevent all persons from teaching slaves to read or write, the use of figures accepted. Whereas the teaching of slaves to read and write has a tendency to excite dissatisfaction in their minds and to produce insurrection and rebellion, to the manifest injury of the citizens of this state. Therefore, be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of North Carolina, and it is hereby enacted by the authority of the same, that any free person who shall hereafter teach or attempt to teach any slave within the state to read or write, the use of figures accepted, or shall give or sell to such slave or slaves any books or pamphlets, shall be liable to indictment in any court of record in this state having jurisdiction thereof, and upon conviction shall, at the discretion of the court, if a white man or woman be fined not less than $100 nor more than $200 or imprisoned. And if a free person of color shall be fined, imprisoned, or whipped at the discretion of the court not exceeding 39 lashes nor less than 20 lashes. Be it further enacted that if any slave shall hereafter teach or attempt to teach any other slave to read or write, the use of figures accepted, he or she may be carried before any justice of the peace, and on conviction thereof shall be sentenced to receive 39 lashes on his or her bare back. Be it further enacted that the judges of the superior courts and the justices of the county courts shall give this act in charge to the grand juries of their respective counties. Now, if you don't know how to read well, your comprehension might be a bit low. So even though I read that, you may not fully understand what the hell is going on. So I'm going to tell it to you simply. There were 3 categories that you could be thrown into if you violate this law. And this is the violation of the law is basically teaching a slave to read or giving them books or pamphlets, with one exemption. If you are a white man or woman, you could be imprisoned or you could be fined. And if you were to be fined, it would be between $100 and $200. If you were a free person of color, you could either be fined or imprisoned or whipped. And this was at the discretion of the court. So if they decided they wanted to whip you that day because they wanted to, that's what was going to happen. And you would be whipped between 20 and 39 times. And if you were a slave teaching another slave to read, you would get 39 lashes on your bare back. There was an exception. The exception was the use of figures. The use of figures is basic math, i.e. addition and subtraction, because they needed you to be able to count the amount of the heads of cattle that they got. They needed you to be able to count bushels of wheat or whatever. They needed you to be able to count, but they didn't need you to be able to read. Isn't that oddly in line with what Juelz have just said? Juelz, whose greatest accomplishment was rhyming boy with boy? Math is important, but reading isn't. Fascinating. Make sure your kids don't end up like Juelz. That's all I'm gonna say.
You could listen to a book on YouTube. You can still obtain the information. And you don't have to know how to read. That's not reading and understanding. I believe common sense is better than everything. I'm a common sense nigga. I'd rather have 0 book smarts and common sense, be able to read the room, be able to read life, be able to read people. I try to understand people, understand. You know what I'm saying? Like, nowadays, you can listen to a book. I just listen to the 48 Laws of Power, not to the...
Real talk, why is it that people who say this shit always the type of dudes who read the 48 Laws of Power or listen to it on audiobook, but then say this dumbass shit? Common sense is the ability to make sound judgments and decisions in everyday situations based on practical knowledge, experience, and widely shared beliefs. I suppose those beliefs can be not written down, but shared through an oral tradition. But I'm talking about practical knowledge, experience, and widely shared beliefs. Would you consider law practical knowledge and widely shared belief? Are laws given to you in an oral sense, i.e. do the police make the effort to explain it to you in detail and all of the options that you have as a result? Or are the laws written in such a impractical way, speaking of practical knowledge, are they written in such a convoluted way that you literally have to hire an expert to translate it for you? How does that work out for y'all? Not just the laws that you run into if you commit an infraction, but what about the laws that are put in place that govern your taxes, since we're talking about financial literacy? What about the laws put in place that decide whether or not you're going to get access to resources and money so that you can get the capital to build a business? What about the laws that are put in place that decide whether or not they're going to be able to put that turbine up in your neighborhood, possibly dump chemicals or pump pollution into your atmosphere that can poison you via your water system or your air or even your food? What about those laws? Are they given to you in an oral tradition? Does Congress make the effort to sit there on C-SPAN and read out the law to you? Even in its convoluted sense, let alone translating it in a way that actually makes sense. Because that last law I read was one big-ass giant run-on sentence, filled with commas and shit, in words that aren't commonly used. Since we're talking about practical knowledge, you may have practical knowledge of common words that are in common usage, but when the law is written, do they tend to use common words? No. What do they tend to do? It's called legalese for a reason. It's literally its own fucking language. You act as if your common sense would be hindered by reading a book. And talking about understanding people, there's an entire branch of academics dedicated to it. It's called sociology. Man, I'm just going to let y'all live your life.